Okay, let's make a start. So stop sharing this. Okay, so hello and welcome everybody. I'm Amy Twigger Holroyd, Associate Professor of Fashion and Sustainability at Nottingham Trent University. And this event is part of NTU's UN 75+2 virtual conference, which is all about global challenges and global connections. So there's a series of these sort of short sessions going on by people in different parts of the university. So a bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded to be able to share it with people who can't make it today. So please make sure that you're muted. That would be really helpful. I'm really happy to see so many people here. This is lovely. I can see recognise names of people who I know and some people who I don't know yet, which is a lovely combination. It would be really nice to get a sort of shared sense of who's here today. So I'd like to invite everyone to say hello in the chat. Do include where you are. It's always nice to know. And if you like, you might want to mention what your interest in the project or this event is, just to get a little bit of dialogue going. So the event focuses on fashion fictions. This is a project that I founded in 2020, and Fashion Fictions brings people together to imagine, explore and enact engaging fictional visions of alternative fashion cultures and systems. So in this session, I'm aiming to do a lot of things, really. We're trying to fit a lot in. I'm trying to kind of outline and introduce the project, give you an insight into the diverse worlds that have been imagined and enacted so far, to launch a set of adaptable resources that have been created to support individuals and groups to organise their own fashion fictions activities, and also to talk with 3 very special guests from different parts of the world. The project website acts as a hub for everything that's going on, really, and I'll make reference to it at various times, lots of times probably, and we'll share links for specific pages in the chat as we go along. But if you lose track of them, basically you should be able to find everything without too much trouble by cruising around the website. You should find things there. But for now, Sally will get us started by sharing the main site link in the chat. Thanks, Sally. That was a bit of a feedback. Okay, I think we've got that sorted out. So before we go any further, I'd like to thank some NTU colleagues. So Professor Killian Ryan, the Pro Vice Chancellor International, led the creation of this conference and therefore the excuse to run something nice this afternoon. And Sarah Pickering has supported the booking and the promotion of the event, which has been very welcome. And Sally, who I just mentioned, Sally Cook, is helping behind the scenes today, which again is very appreciated. Fashion Fictions is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and this funding enabled me to have a research fellow, Dr. Matilda Aspinall, working on the project with me for a year, up until just a couple of months ago. So I'd like to recognise and thank Matilda for her input as well throughout that time, and feeding into the things I'm going to talk about today. So I'm really happy to be joined by 3 guests for today's session, who are critical friends of the project and will help us to explore global perspectives on this thing that we're trying to do. So I'll ask them each to introduce themselves briefly. So first we'll go to Erica de Greef in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you guests and participants at the Fashion Fictions discussion conversation that we're having today. So my name is Erica de Greef, and I am co-founder of the African Fashion Research Institute, which is based in South Africa. And my work primarily has been to think about the positionality of fashion in the global south and how it plays out in a kind of politics and a kind of cultural realm and in a kind of the more sort of complicated space of identity and identity narratives. So I think that is how I come to the project today, to think about some of these more philosophical questions that may arise in relation to the material questions that I think the Fashion Fictions project puts forward. So thank you so much for the invitation.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica.
And let's move on to Sanem Odebaşı, who's in Turkey.
Thank you, Amy. I'm a fashion scholar from Turkey. I'm living in Eskişehir, a really small town in the center of Anatolia, and working as a doctor and academic member of textile and fashion design department in Eskişehir Technical University. My basically research area is focusing on sustainable fashion, but I also got to understand our relationships with clothes. So I also focus on fashion and memory topic, which is quite interesting topic and concept to look further and beyond on sustainability. And I'm happy to be with you today, and I hope you will enjoy our conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sanem. And finally, Janine Diego, who's in the USA.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Erica and Sanem. It's a privilege to be a part of this conversation. So I'm a fashion designer and critical theorist with about 25 years of industry experience in different regions. At present, I'm here in the United States teaching fashion design at VCU Arts in Richmond, Virginia. And I head the sartorial studies research program at 17 Institute of Critical Studies, which is in Mexico City. And my interests lie at the intersections of fashion and politics, as expressed through self-making practices of undisciplined bodies, particularly in Mexico and Cuba. And I'll try to talk a little bit about that as we get into our hands in the dough. Thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you, Janine. Let's get the hands in the dough. So the format of this session basically alternates between some short presentations from me and then sort of responses and a bit of discussion from Erica, Sanem and Janine. And I've got a film to share with you about halfway through as well. So as I say, there's loads to fit in. So we haven't built in time for wider discussion, but I really encourage you to use the chat to add comments as we go along. Use that mode of communication. So let's get stuck back into the slides. Okay. So I suspect that many of those here today, if not all of you, are familiar with the many problems associated with the way that we commonly use clothes today, particularly in the global north. But just to kind of set the scene, this is obviously the context that this work is happening in, with negative environmental and social impacts generated from production through to use and disposal. And these problems are made worse by the ever-increasing volumes of garments being produced by an industry driven by economic growth. So the Fashion Fictions project is really aiming to support transitions towards sustainable post-growth fashion systems, and to acknowledge the huge reduction in resource use that will be needed if we're to work within ecological limits. So these systems are going to have to involve different social and cultural norms, different economies, different ways of living with our clothes. And I think another starting point for the project is the fact that it can sometimes be hard to imagine alternatives that feel radically different because the status quo just feels so entrenched. And so the ethos of the project really is to create a safe space where we can explore the many possibilities of what alternative fashion systems might look like. So kind of a baseline space for us to imagine and think together and think about what is it that we might wish for. If we could think about a dream fashion system, what would it be like? So to do this, we imagine contemporary realities in parallel worlds. So these are worlds that have split off from our own at some point in history, taken a different path. We're trying to imagine positive and enticing worlds in terms of individual satisfaction, social justice and sustainability. And we're imagining worlds that are physically possible but push beyond what feels plausible to us today from whatever position we're in doing that imagining. And there's a three-stage structure that supports the imagining. So at stage 1, we write 100-word outlines of fictional fashion worlds. They're like little seeds. At stage 2, we build on the outlines, usually different people coming along, building on the outlines, creating visual and material prototypes to represent life in those worlds. And then at stage 3, we step into the worlds and find ways to enact what life is like there and reflect on these experiences. Now, having run some of these speculative activities over the past couple of years, I've been able to observe that they often generate what I've identified as a sense of wonder. So this is a fresh perspective on our real world experiences of fashion. So we go to this speculative place and we look back at the real world through slightly different eyes. So this wonder prompts us to ask searching questions about the status quo. Really importantly, to identify precedents, whether historical or contemporary, so real life things that have happened that we might draw on and take inspiration from for different ways of living with our clothes, and to come up with concrete ideas for action, whether personal or collective. So my hope is that by doing these kind of playful, speculative activities together, it kind of sets us up to carry this wonder and a sense of possibility that it represents into what I think of as like the wilds of the real world, to feed into a movement for change, which is what we really urgently need. So to kind of introduce this global perspective focus of today's event, which it's conversations I'm really excited to have, I thought I would do a little bit of a world map to show you. So if you can see a tiny red dot there, that's us in Nottingham, starting the project with a pilot workshop in February 2020, so just before the pandemic. We didn't know what was just around the corner. And then as that year went on, I started to open up the project to contributions from others, and it's developed and grown from there. So this gives you a bit of a sense of where people are have been contributing from. Contributions from every continent except Antarctica. This isn't an exhaustive map. It was me going through the records that I have and just trying to give a sense of the span of different locations that people have been contributing from. The larger dots are activities in education settings, so that's been a really positive element of the project so far. And the smaller dots are individuals participating via the website or online workshops. And this is so satisfying and exciting for me to see, because my ambition from the outset for this project was, I was hoping to try and build something that could be a way of gathering diverse perspectives and experiences together, and very much with the humble hope of learning from and recognising the value of ideas from people who have been underrepresented so far in the sustainable fashion movement, recognising my position in a privileged position in the global north. So it's been really lovely to hear from people who are contributing from so many places. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'd like to pause the bit of me talking to open up the conversation to my guests. So hopefully you've sort of picked up from this introduction. Oh, I'm getting an echo. I'm getting an echo from you. Okay. Thank you. That resolves the problem. Thank you. Yeah, so as you've hopefully picked up, the project as a whole is driven by a belief in the value of imagination and speculation as a way of expanding our collective sense of possibility in relation to our fashion systems. And this makes sense to me, as I say, as a kind of privileged person sitting where I'm sitting. And I'm pleased that it's resonated with the people who have chosen to get involved so far. But I'm really interested to hear from each of you, just I guess a few initial thoughts how you respond to these ideas of imagination and speculation in the cultural contexts that you're familiar with. So if we go first to Erica for a couple of minutes.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I was so struck by, how you introduced the project as these alternatives that feel so radically different from the ones that you're familiar with. And I guess part of that is also the same experience we have when we travel. We enter into worlds that feel so radically different, and not just from a language or a cultural, but even from a fashion perspective. So really sort of understanding that space for imagination to explore those spaces. However, I think maybe that's part of the reason why you're inviting us into this conversation is there's a bit of a disconnect with the enjoyment of that imagination, and I think the very lived experiences. So from the global south, the very, very lived experiences of what those alternatives are that are radically different. And so speculation is very much a survival tool. It is not something that is brought in as a kind of space to dream only as an escape, but actually it is heavily invested in questions of survival and imagination and survival when there is so little, when there is so when the lack or the extreme sort of possibilities around policed bodies and difficult lives. So I think for me there's a really interesting tension there around the role of speculation as a place of survival. So I mean those were just some of my first sort of thoughts, and the need for us to listen to these other ways where speculation has been used from a very different positions in the world. So we'll share some more thoughts later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you. So if we pass on to Janine.
Thank you, Amy. I love what you just said, Erica. I totally 100% agree. I do think that speculative practice is linked to survival, and I'm just going to add to that same idea because it's at the core of what I wanted to say. Because I love to quote Donna Haraway's, very famous formulation, and I'm going to read it because I don't know it by heart. When she says, "It matters what matters we used to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions. What ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds and what worlds make stories." So this is at the core, and I do think that it isn't hard to acknowledge the critical potential of speculation as transformative practice once you realize that everything that we're living today is not a given, but the result of a palimpsest of stories that have been told over time and across generations. So I definitely think that what Erica said is key. It is a survival tool, and of course, it doesn't mean to say that that this doesn't also occur in the global north, because there's always disenfranchised bodies, even in the global north. So I just think that it's it's important to acknowledge also the struggles within countries that have a very entrenched status quo, but that also are going to by default disenfranchise some bodies. So thank you. I'll
Thank you. When I think about the speculation, it also goes hand in hand with reality, as my colleagues already discussed. So when I think about the imagination, it also goes hand in hand with utopia and dystopia. So in that sense, if you want to reach and beyond utopia, you have to actually go through very dysfunctional and dystopic universe. Even in the films, even in the science fictions, in dystopic films, there is a little bit of element of hope at the end of the tunnel, where people, the characters, can actually grab a little and then go to reach and kind of an utopic universe. So that is really interesting for me. And I think to find this little small gestures and a little bit of the poetic side of the reality and the poetic side of the life itself is really interesting, because otherwise I think we will be quite bored and we will end up with really bad scenarios in that sense. So we have this kind of little bit of joy in our lives, if it's fashion or not. And what is interesting about this project, and also with the fictions, that we don't ask why or how, we ask what if, how about. So that's really exciting for us as participants, because I think there are more regenerative questions, and that's what we all need in that sense.
Thank you, Sanem. Thank you, all three of you. It's really great to hear your thoughts, and what we've ended on there feeds very nicely into the next bit that I wanted to share in terms of these what if questions. So Erica, I saw that you weren't seeing my slides, so I'm going to share now, and everyone please shout if you're not seeing them. Okay, so hopefully you can see the slide with the number 1 on it. Okay, thumbs up, excellent, good. Okay, so I'd like to tell you a bit more about the processes at each stage. So I already mentioned this 3-stage structure, which is really key. It's kind of the core thing of fashion fictions, is which stage are we talking about. So tell you a bit more about the processes and share just a few of the great things that people have come up with. And I need to restrain myself in doing this because there is such a diversity and richness of things that people have come up with. I could dwell on these for a long time. So we'll start with stage 1, where, as I said, people are invited to write just 100 words to outline a fictional fashion world. And I created a guide on the website that takes people through this process. But the essence is really to come up with a kind of core what if. So as Sanem was saying, it's like, what if the world was like this, or my fashion experience was like this, and to think about the context in which it takes place. So I encourage people, we could talk about worlds, and you could think about a global system, but it could also be something that happens in one village or one family in a parallel world. And then importantly, to come up with a backstory to explain how this parallel world developed differently to our own. Now, often people do this by drawing on their own experiences, sort of focusing on something that frustrates them about their experience of fashion today and turning it sort of inside out. And another way is to use this generator that I created, which I created as a way of kind of getting people started quickly in this kind of playing around with possibilities. So as you can see here, you can click the text and it cycles through different options, so you can sort of think about play around with creating a world and finding one that appeals to you. And whether from this starting point or kind of an idea that's come out of your head by itself, that's then developed into a 100-word outline. So I've just got one up here for you. It's often about making it with there's often more ideas that you have than you can fit into this 100-word limit. So there's an element of deciding what's the most important to include. But even just a quick scan through the summaries of worlds that are available on the website gives a sense of the richness and inventiveness of the things that people have come up with. And the ideas explored in these fictions are really varied. So spanning from aspects of the clothes themselves, how they're made and distributed and kind of owned within the home, through to really big cultural concepts, aspects of economics, law, kind of global issues. So if you want to browse through these in your own time, if you haven't done already, you'll find them on the Worlds tab of the website. So Sally's going to paste the link in the chat for us. And now moving on to stage 2. At stage 2, we're building on the outlines and creating visual and material prototypes. So we're, it's often a different person or a different group of people. Often people are working in groups for this stage, and they will pick up a world that was written by somebody else. And everything on the website has a Creative Commons license. That's a condition of submission, and that supports this kind of asynchronous collaboration and chains of influence between different people. So to give you a taste of what this stage 2 process can look like, participants are invited to first develop their understanding of their selected world through discussion. So I usually call it kind of fleshing it out. They're starting with this seed and then kind of putting flesh on the bones of it. And in doing that, I really encourage people to extend, adapt, and even reinvent the stage 1 fiction to suit their interests and understandings. So that's kind of another opportunity for people to bring their own priorities, their own view of the world to this process. And then to plan and create a visual or material prototype to represent that world's fashion system. So they might work physically, they might work digitally, it might be a mix of the two. It could be very, very simple, it might be something more complex. In the workshops I've run, we provide a selection of basic materials and equipment within the workshop space. And people also sometimes bring things from home, typically craft supplies and samples. And with these things, they create really a great variety of prototypes. Sorry, I'm just going to. So this is where I'm going to restrain myself from telling you about every one of these prototypes because each one has a great story behind it. But people make objects, they make images, they make kind of digital mock-ups of things, they make analog collages, even short films. And yeah, thinking about what sometimes quite everyday things they might come across in this world that would represent its fictional culture. And yeah, there's dozens of these on the website in the explorations tab. So Sally will hopefully just stick that link in the chat for us. And yeah, they're really nice to explore and see the outcomes of this kind of fleshing out and then boiling it down into a thing. What would this thing be like in this world? So again, moving on. At stage 3, we step into the worlds, finding ways to enact what life is like there and reflect on these experiences. So we've run a few of these so far, and they've been really rich. There's a couple on the website so far on the enactments page that will go in the chat as well. So here we've got a enactment in which a geographically dispersed group presented themselves to the mushroom guides of that world once a week for 6 weeks and shared their experiences in a WhatsApp group. And the second was an in-person event where we enacted a world in which all textile production had ceased and people took to dressing in leftover sheets. And stepping into these worlds in this way, using our bodies, what we've found is it really shows us things that we wouldn't find otherwise. So there's something about kind of committing with yourself and with your body in the real world that really brings a new perspective and new insights. So I'd now like to give you a sneak preview of the film of another enactment. So this is hot off the press. And this is World 27, where textile histories are central to the way that garments are valued. And wearers are motivated to keep items in circulation through ritual exchange events. So this will be a bit of a change in pace. We can sit back and enjoy the experience, but I really wanted to give you a sense of the participants' experiences, which I hope that this will do. So.
Yeah, you would think that would have been a very difficult experience to get through with a colleague without feeling like you. Stage where we were on holiday in Suffolk for a few days, and then after that, his mom and yeah. So I was thinking, and Kevin was terrified every time I saw him. Oh, look at this. That's incredible. It's like, who are you? I am Vanessa's jacket. Who are you? I've had a long and differentiated life with Vanessa, but recently I've been being worn again, which feels really nice.
What happens through you? What happens through me?
What happens through you?
I go out on adventures where I don't even know where I'm walking.
Because they're not able to use the land in traditional ways.
I think I'm going to repeat myself. I think what happens through me is a sense of femininity and freedom and summer.
More depressing side of me.
And
So both negative and positive memories. When I look at this t-shirt, it reminds me of going to New Zealand. It reminds me of taking a chance and meeting somebody that I'd not met before.
It's the fibres from loads of other garments over the years, and I can look at some of them, like, you know, the fibre there, and the junks that came from.
The main problem is that actually means a number of different things in itself as a term. So it's a bit wood that we term.
It's fine, it'll survive. There are a lot of stories in this garment, there are a lot of memories in this garment, but because it's faded, it started to get worn as a cleaning up around the house garment, and it is on a new stage of life.
I wore it all over the place, to parties and visiting and sightseeing, and it went to New Delhi and the caves at Ellora with me where I wore it, but then it came back.
It's been on loads of adventures with me, and it just represents protection and freedom and adventure. You know, the earth that gave rise to the cotton farmers, the cotton pickers, the dyers, the weavers, the spinners, the printers.
It is just not quite right for what I need it for.
So this is a massive act of generosity because it's brought me a lot of happiness. So
All of those things that happened before I even got it, it's just going to throw it over that line there. And it's just going to fly down like a zip wire.
When someone dies and you look in their wardrobe and you see their clothes,
Yes.
and their clothes, they're still there, their clothes, it kind of feels a similar way, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to give this away.
Why do we think of our clothes as a blank? Why do we want our clothes to be a blank slate?
How is shopping more fun than exchange? Because I'm not convinced it is.
why did it take me so long to learn what suits my body shape? Some things always look good. Why can't I find what makes me feel comfortable?
Why does everyone want to look the same at a certain point in time?
We should tax virgin materials and not labor.
I said there should be a maximum limit on clothes owned, one in, one out.
So we're kind of creating stories around things, but they're our stories, they're real stories.
Everybody has brought something that's individual to them, but you possibly couldn't find in the shops if you went looking now. So it's really shows you what has the meaning.
What's been really nice today is talking to each other, and there's something about that, isn't there, that just feels really good.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. I was really happy to be able to share that with you. It's very hot off the press. So as a sneak preview, look out for it being made available on the website soon. And as you might have spotted at the end, the original fiction that was based on was written by Janine in the context of Cuba, and was developed by a group at a Stage 2 workshop who translated it to their knowledge. So they translated it to a UK context, which is, you know, their what they were familiar with. So again, I'd like to open up the conversation to my guests. So I guess the prompt for this is thinking about all of these three stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Would you like to, are you aware of any existing initiatives that you're aware of in your context that you work in that relate to these approaches? Or are there any real life examples that you could connect to ideas in the fictions. So a response to either of those is very welcome. So if we go to Janine first this time, let me stop sharing, sorry.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm so moved and excited to see that. Wow. Yes, so I think, I just want to, preempt this by saying that my cultural context is hard to pin down because I have so many. Right now, I'm in Richmond, Virginia. The United States is one of my countries. Also, Mexico is another. Also, Cuba is another through my father. And I lived in India for many years, and it's like my adopted country. That said, I would like to share the fact that the World 27 is actually, was inspired by my research in Cuba. The original blurb, if you will, was textile histories become central to the way we value garments, with Cuba as a global leader in the post-capitalist heirloom chain economy. So the idea is that, that people, of course, exchange clothes, and clothes that were unscarred had little appeal. The clothes that didn't have any stories had little appeal, and rather clothing that had a history and had been worn and had a history was of greater value than something new, like someone said in the video, a blank slate. And so I was inspired by real life contact with self-making practices in Cuba, which I began researching in 2019, and which I've written about, and which I'm making a documentary film about. And so the very challenge of dressing in Cuba from a logistic and economic standpoint, but also from an ideological standpoint, enables a very unique and singular relationship to fashion and dress, where everything is imagination and speculation. Everything, just survival. And this goes back to what Erica just said, a little while ago. So there's the very Cuban word, which is resolver, which they use very, we have to solve. It's like solve. We have to solve this, right? But it even predates the Cuban Revolution. So it's very ingrained in the Cuban psyche. So from how you get your hands on an article of clothing to how you'll come up with the currency to get it, whether in kind or in cash or bartering or whatever is necessary, fashion, that is a challenge in Cuba. And fashion as such, in its capitalist expression, was for so long frowned upon by the Cuban Revolution. So there's also an ideological challenge, because also dress was used as a socializing tool in the construction of the new man, etc. So that was, that was very important, and it's ongoing. It's happening as we speak, There's something else also that I'd like to share with you that's going on right now. And after I just try to introduce the topic, there are a couple of little tiny videos. I hope they don't take up too much time, of what's happening in Mexico right now. And it's a practice that's tied to a strong wave of feminism among young women in response to state-sanctioned violence against us. And secondhand clothing street markets, or what they call economic protests, are mushrooming in many areas of Mexico City. And so here, self-making and sorority building practices are intrinsically tied to fashion and sustainability, and they take place in public squares. And this phenomenon was sparked by the confluence of crises. In addition to the violence against women, the pandemic set women back decades in terms of their presence in the workforce in Mexico and in the world, I'm assuming. So an already precarious economic situation became abysmal. And so this coincided as well with the Me Too movement. And there was this, this movement that empowered women to go out into the public sphere. So the idea of women coming together and dressing stridently and occupying a public space to sell secondhand clothing and handcrafted items and shouting anti-patriarchal slogans and protecting one another when they were harassed, it was unimaginable 10 or 15 years ago, just unimaginable. So there really is a complete paradigm shift among Mexican young women that gave way to a movement that's profoundly grassroots. And I'd like to share just very brief videos.
Okay. I think they're working for me, so I'm going to have a go at sharing my, let's see. So is that showing for you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so let's give that a whirl.
Does it have volume, maybe? A little bit.
Are you hearing the sound?
No.
Okay, I've got the sound.
Okay.
I don't think I know how to make that come through quickly,
Um,
but maybe you can speak over the
yeah, I can
visuals. If I
yeah.
do one more, maybe?
Yeah, we can do one more. And so these are, yeah, these are some scenes from a protest in something called Plaza Rio de Janeiro, which is like a public square. And here, this young lady, they have signs on the floor. They not only sell their wares, if you will, but they have signs. They do they shout slogans. They have opportunities for these young women to like share their experiences with violence and with whether it's economic violence or sexual violence. And so they have these like exercises that they also use this air, these occupied spaces for, and they're constantly under threat of being thrown out because they're not paying anybody to be there. So usually with the street markets, somebody gets paid, whether it's the city, a local political leader, so they're constantly fighting to just remain there. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Janine. It's lovely amazing to get that kind of window onto a different part of the world. That's amazing. Sanem, can we move on to you?
Yeah, sure. I think all of us kind of had this different imaginations when we were under lockdown. And, it was that kind of an imagination that while we were building our own immunity, we actually have to think beyond, and we actually have to think also about the community, where we are at, how we are going to get together and do something, or do a work for social justice or for sustainability. And I think at that time, the first thing that I've done to look at my wardrobe and analyze the choices I made. So actually COVID-19 became somehow a therapist for me to, made me realize the things that I were really keen on in a material level, or the things that makes me feel fashionable, or, so I had to question. And right now, this question made me think about the choices I make, but I'm also interested on what people, and especially what my students like to wear. So this kind of dual exchange is really interesting. And at that time, I participated in a fashion fictions project. So it made me realize, actually, you can create a lot of space to discuss these issues and problems. Or I go to, let's say, very high street fashion brand and collect 10 garments and paid a lot money for it, but I feel really responsible for the environment. Okay, how am I going to answer that? What should I do? How should I actually, should I punish myself, or should I feel guilty about it, or should I feel good about it because, those garments make me feel good? So these discussions are really important. And I think in terms of sustainability, we forget the meanings of psychology, in that sense. So it's building up again and again. And in Turkey right now, of course, it's more of a baby steps when we are talking about sustainable fashion. We are still talking about the methods of design. We are still talking about reuse, repurpose, and such things. It's, moving beyond and forward. But I think we shouldn't miss those discussions as well, because they are quite important and part of our lives. And when we are thinking about building a community, at that time, me and a friend of mine, we were so lonely in our own spaces. And we asked that question, what if we do something to contribute to our community, to people that we are living? What if we create a sustainable fashion dictionary? I'll be the writer, you will be the designer, you will create the pictograms for each of the word, and you should write and, you know, redactate it and on again. So we happily, I'm happy to say this right now, Turkey has a sustainable fashion dictionary. And, you know, this is kind of the starting point, and where we are end up is a whole story. So just looking to those stories and looking to those narrations are really important, I think.
Yeah, I love that little what if Turkey had a sustainable fashion dictionary, and then we make it, you know, just sometimes asking the question starts off the process. Okay, let's go to Erica.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to, you know, I think the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic had such a visceral effect on the way in which we experience our personal lives, but in relation to a public. So I'm very interested how, Janine, you were talking about the feminist movements and then this enactment in the public. So I'm going to pull back a little bit to the beginning of the 20th century as an example of perhaps one of maybe these radically different worlds that wasn't such a radically different world because it was a very lived experience. So South Africa was colonized the rest of the world, and part of that colonization was certain enactments in public spaces, who was allowed in those public spaces and how people were allowed to bring themselves into those public spaces. So I write about it in a maybe I'll put the link in the chat. I write about it in a reflection on an exhibition, and it's about a particular pair of trousers. And in the early 20th century, miners would arrive from the countryside and arrive in hostels and this was in Johannesburg, but in the major mining capitals. And one of the criteria was that anything traditional or anything rural was banned from these hostels. So things like beadwork or any kind of shells or embellishments, adornment was banned. And in a kind of reclamation of those cultures to kind of find ways to bring that culture, alternative materials were introduced by the miners, and their garments were re-embellished, but using alternative materials. So not the original materials, but almost representations of those materials. So re-adorning by a different method. So there's a question on it, and I think I've spoken about it elsewhere around cultural sustainability. So these very, very important ways in which culture tradition is translated and lives on. It's that power for it to continue and to live on. So yeah, maybe I'll just put the text in the chat, but a very, very lived, and that's I think what's so important about opening up this conversation to include the possibilities from places outside of the fashion centre.
Thank you very much, Erica.
Thank you very much, Erica.
Could you mute, please,
Could
Erica?
you mute?
I get that echo.
I get that echo.
Thank you. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. This is feeling like a really rich conversation. So I'm going to move on to my final bit of stuff that I want to share. Which means I need to share my slides. Let me think about that. Okay, so sort of moving on now to the, I guess the invitation part, the invitation and the encouragement for anybody watching to get involved with the project. So the project from the outset has had a really open ethos. So the ethos is that anyone, anywhere is welcome to organise their own fashion fictions activities. And so far that invitation has mainly been taken up in university settings, and that's been really valuable in feeding in different perspectives to the project and helping it to grow, and continues to be a really important element. And sort of building on that, we're really interested in extending participation to a wider range of groups and communities, or extending the invitation to participate, I guess I should say. And this work is at an early stage, but over the next couple of years, the agenda is to develop a network of people who are running activities, which we're calling the Fashion Fictions Organisers Network. And we aim to use the network as a space of learning and mutual support where we can explore ideas together. And we have plans for the first phase of this, so with some opportunities coming up for organisers or potential organisers to discuss, shape and test ideas for activities. And so to start this off, we're looking for people, anywhere in the world who can help us bring these activities to life in different settings. So the one element would be organisers or potential organisers, so people who are interested in using and adapting the structure of fashion fictions and the resources that we've got to organise their own workshop or project. So that might be an experienced facilitator or teacher, or it might be someone with no experience of organising anything like that. It might be someone who's part of an organisation or totally independent, and they might have a group in mind to work with, or not at all. It might just be, oh, I'd like to get involved in something like this. I don't really know who I would be doing it with. All of those people are very welcome. And then the other part, or the other direction that people might come from, are groups. So groups of people who are interested in taking part in fashion fictions activities, and that could be in person or online, and it could be like literally a little group of friends. It could be something more organised, a guild or some kind of enthusiast group. Maybe it could be an international network of people who are in touch for some reason. And so we've kind of opened up this call for people to express interest in getting involved. There's no rush to run something, and by putting your hand up, you're not committing that you definitely will. We won't. You're not under any obligation. And if you were to run something, it could take place anytime over the next couple of years. So it's kind of a seeing who's around and wants to put their hand up rather than you signing on the dotted line. And so we'd love to hear from you. And we've asked for people to put their hand up by the end of this month, just to help inform our next steps. So Sally's going to share the link to a short form that you can fill in to express interest. It would be really lovely to hear from you. And if anyone's watching this on the recording, you'll find a link to the form on the join in page of the website. So I wanted to share with you some things that we've already created, that I've already put together, that could be useful and I think are used by people who are running activities. And I've developed these while running the workshops and enactments myself, so the things that I've run for the purposes of the research. So yeah, I've kind of been running things, I've developed ways of facilitating them and tried to capture them in various resources that could be used by other people. So these include the online guides that I think I might have mentioned earlier, that take people through the process of creating either a stage 1 fiction or a stage 2 prototype. And it's a rough guide to follow. It's not a prescriptive set of steps. So I'm just flicking through the stage 2 guide here to show you what it looks like. It could be used by someone working individually, so anyone coming along to the website could have a go, or it could also be used as the basis for a group or kind of workshop activity. I've tried to make them user-friendly as much as I can, and as I mentioned earlier, all of the guides, as well as everything created by participants, is shared under a Creative Commons license, so they can be used freely and adapted as desired. And you can access these from the Worlds page and the Explorations page of the website. So as well as those guides, I've also created some workshop plans. So I guess a bit more, slightly more formal in a way, which are intended for use by organisers and facilitators. So there's suggested timings and kind of notes for facilitators. And I said I am launching them today. So I announced them launched. Imagine me breaking a bottle of something on the hull of a ship. So there has been a stage 1 plan on the website for a year or so, but I've just updated it. And that's a 2-hour workshop, now with an optional 30-minute reflection activity, which is about kind of trying to capture that sense of wonder that I talked about earlier. And joined now, all new, is a plan for a stage 2 workshop. It's called an extended workshop because it's either a 6-hour or a 12-hour workshop that you would probably do in a series of sessions. And at the other end of the time spectrum is a really quick taster workshop that takes in both stage 2 and stage 3 in just 90 minutes. So what I maybe haven't explained so far is that when people are running things, they sometimes focus on one stage, but there's also potential to combine and to move through different stages of the project as you wish. And for all of these resources, there's a workshop plan and a set of slides, and where needed, some handouts too. And then another quite recent addition to the website are some resources that are designed to help you stage your own stage 3 activities. So I've called them recipes. So Sally's going to stick a link to the organise page in the chat, where you can find further details and access the files. And anyone watching back, you can access the organise page via the join in tab. Okay, it's turning into quite a big website, and the navigation becomes important. And I really want to emphasise that all of these plans are offered as starting points to be adapted rather than kind of fixed prescriptive instructions. I've included some suggested adaptations in each plan to kind of help that suggestion along, but the possibilities are really endless, and I really, they will need to be adapted for different settings. And the education page of the website shows many different ways that activities have been organised, mainly in university, so ranging from like a half-hour seminar activity through to a major project that lasts 14 weeks, and it's kind of the major project of a module for second-year students, for example, and everything in between. So there's another link that Sally will share. And I also recognise that there are many settings that might need different approaches to those used in these plans. So I developed these based on what I'd done with adults who are generally pretty aware of the issues around fashion and sustainability, and are probably somewhat familiar with the idea of prototyping. So they might not make so much sense in other contexts. We've started with some partners thinking about what fashion fictions activities in primary schools might look like. And also just in general, there's so many possibilities for what these activities within this 3-stage structure could look like. It's really exciting, but like it's also huge. So if we're going to explore this, we need to be doing it together. And that's the idea of the Organisers Network, is to learn and explore together, all of us learning from each other. I learn a lot from the great ideas that people have come up with that have done activities already. People come up with great ways of doing things which I would never have thought of. So, you know, it's totally shared and collaborative is very much the way that we need to go. Yeah, it's fueled by the creativity of the community in terms of how we run the things, as much as the worlds and the prototypes and things that we come up with. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there, and for a final time I'd like to open up the conversation to my guests. So I guess however you might like to respond is very welcome. I'd be interested to know if you can see opportunities for these resources and guides and things to be used in the places that you're familiar with, and any thoughts on how they might need to be adapted, or what alternative route to supporting kind of this kind of speculation might make sense to you. So if we go to Sanam first this time.
Sure. I think it's a really good practice for fashion students, first of all, because it's actually not a very typical workshop or very typical making practice or application, I would say. And also it has some kind of very different type of strategies, because this is not only speaking about the design methods or how to make things in that sense, but there are elements, there are interactions, there are also relationships, there are type of services, which I think can be also used to create a business strategy, to think more beyond horizons, longer horizons, I would say. It can create a kind of a different mindset, and I think it's really important for students, because in most of the cases, and I was a former fashion design student, so I can speak very easily on that. Oftentimes we design things, we design stuff, but we don't design the services, we don't, let's say, design the empathy, we don't design the good relationships, friendships. So in that sense, I think fashion fictions projects and those worlds are really helping and creative tool to talk more deeply about it. But I'm not sure how can we adopt these methods beyond fashion schools, other than fashion schools. So I'm also thinking about it as well in that sense, and it would be lovely to hear other comments too. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sanam. I'm glad that you can really see the potential in the education sphere. I agree. It's unconventional, but it seems to, it's been picked up by in so many places. I think it also makes sense for people in a really interesting way. Erica.
Thank you. And Sanam, I do agree. I think that the project has incredible value in learning, and Amy is aware that I did use it in quite an interesting way as a kind of cross-cultural learning, because I think it also opens up it troubles positionality, how we understand the world and how we understand certain scenarios and how we imagine ourselves, surviving certain scenarios. So I think as a cross-cultural, I think and interdisciplinary learning tool. And so maybe that is one real purpose or outcome of fashion fictions, is to change behaviors of maybe students or designers or even consumers. I think some of the enactments that you shared, the kind of consumers maybe impacting fashion industry or kind of policy makers, thinking strategically around projects, so a kind of activation to encourage learning. But maybe it's a question that I'm sort of sitting with, and I'm going to refer to Janine, just because you shared the video of the women in Mexico on the street. So as resources, it's about learning or imagining and experiencing or enacting. But what is the real change? Are there any kind of real changes that are made possible through these acts of imagination? Is there a real difference to women or people's lives through the fashion fictions? So I think the tension for me is sitting a little bit, and can the fashion, I'm not saying that it's the purpose of the fashion fictions, but how can it really improve quality of water or, growing techniques or shoppers' behavior, what are the real changes? So the kinds of benefits, particularly if we're kind of sort of thinking who we're wanting to use these fashion fiction cards. So in an environment where it's not as precarious, using the cards to think about possibilities versus an environment that is more precarious, using the cards to, is it just to think about possibilities, or is there real urgency to life changes, to real kind of more real world outcomes? So I think that's the tension possibly, and it might be an important distinction or possibility. But thank you so much for sharing these. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that distinction between the speculative space and then coming back to the real world, and what do you bring with you, and what change can be made, is really something I'm feels very important, and trying to carry that while not putting too much pressure on the imagination, because it needs to be able to fly. It's trying to carry these things is a balance, and will, I think, feel different in different places. So Janine, I'm sure you have things to share.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, wow, so many things to say. I'm going to try to be brief. I do see it. I do see a zillion, adaptations and applications for fashion fictions. I loved it from the get-go. I love it still today. And I think the enactment aspect is key. It's super, super, super key, given where we are at as humanity today. And of course, I think of my students. Of course, I think of them because they are the future producers of fashion, because they are consumers. We know that, if we're in a teaching environment, we know that the greatest consumers of fashion are fashion students. And I myself, have to constantly restrain those impulses. But yes, I do think that, real life enactment as a tool, I think that, the structure that you've created through fashion fictions is fantastic in so many ways, but it also, if it makes it the way that you've designed it, it makes it so that, we can come in and just go directly to the enactment and see how to, and play, because speculation is intrinsically linked, of course, to play. We can't do it and without that element of freedom that you just mentioned. And so it was great to watch the video and to see how how this could actually take place. I think that for fashion students who are used to doing everything online, and who in fact were forced to do everything online through through the pandemic, etc., taking that step toward enactment will necessarily leave an imprint in their practice. I definitely do think so, and I'm super excited. I already have an idea that I will discuss with you later, Amy. But I understand Erica's concern about the need, the urgency and how this translates into real life transformation. I do think that that it's possible. I think that we have to sort of go where the energy is. Not maybe to impose. Maybe we might find that or feel that we're preaching to the choir, but I think it's the choir is going to go out there and do their own preaching later. I think when I think of for example here in Richmond, which is a city that I did not know before now, I'm very pleasantly surprised to see how much, there's a thriving thrift shop, secondhand, practice. There are no large shopping malls, hallelujah, no. So I think that it's, people who are around in their 20s are ripe, really ripe for this. And I'm sure that it's the same if it's like that here, which is in a big city. It's, it's a city of 500,000 people. It definitely can be that, it can be that way elsewhere. I think Mexico is the perfect example. I would have never in my life imagined that these movements would be taking place on the street today. I would have never imagined. I always, felt like, oh, when I first moved there in 2000, I was very frustrated by even the relationship that, among women that was fostered by, the media, et cetera, women as rivals, and not really caring about each other at all. Everything that the media tries to sell you that is true. And look where we are today, and it is these young people, and it's cross-generational. Many of these women that I've spoken to in doing this research about those street markets have brought their mothers to the street markets. And the mothers, tell you, like, I didn't really know, and feminism for me was like this, a four-letter word practically. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now I understand it. And they go with their daughters. It's incredibly moving, and it's a definite paradigm shift that was completely unexpected. It was very fast. It was very fast.
Thank you, Janine. Yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm feeling full of energy to go and to go and do things. And I'm really grateful for the comments in the chat, which I won't read out because you can read them there. But it's really great to get those comments and thoughts and experiences from people who have taken part in the enactments as people here. So on that note, I do have one last bit to share, which is an invitation to join the next enactment and to try it out for yourself. Okay, so yes, it's nearly time to wrap up. But before we do, I would like to invite everyone to take part in the first open participation stage 3 activity. So the things that I've run so far have been on a fairly small scale because I was documenting them in great detail for the purposes of the kind of the research side of fashion fictions. And it was also about me learning, like, how I'd made up this plan, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, but I didn't really actually know how the stage 3 things would happen. So it's been very much a process of learning from people who've done great work of this type before, and trying to see how it makes sense in the context of this project and trying things out. So having sort of gone through that process, I have a little more experience now to run things that I can invite more people into. So yes, this is the first kind of open invitation stage 3 activity, which will take place over 2 weeks in January. It'll be a daily wardrobe challenge called Material Mindfulness, and that has grown from the World 45 fiction and prototypes, which were developed by Rachel, who's I've seen is here. She was part of the group at a stage 2 workshop who did that. I've picked up a little strand of what they developed and run with it in a tangential direction. So in World 45, people have a deep and even a spiritual connection with their textiles. And so the invitation is for you to enact a daily practice of World 45 by sharing a close-up of your clothes on Instagram or privately or on another platform of your choice every day for 2 weeks in response to a daily 1-word prompt. So there's a page on the website with more details. It's part of the enactments section, but Sally will post the link in the chat here. And I've tried to design it as something that's quite modest, like quite a small task and sort of easy to have a go at, hopefully. So if you think that you'd like to take part, you can sign up via that page, via the page that's in the chat, to receive email reminders. So then you'll know when it's happening and you'll receive the daily prompts. So yeah, I really invite and encourage you to get involved. As we've said already, I think what we're finding from these stage 3 activities in particular is that even something quite small, when enacted in your real life, really sort of opens a door to another world, and this kind of taps into this sense of wonder. So it's a great way of getting involved with the project. And what and joining what is really feeling like a sort of growing community of people who are connected with the project in different ways and exploring things together. So that's the end from me. There'll be time for just a final comment from each of my guests. I'm conscious that people who have come along might have questions. I know there's people who are here who are thinking about running something as organisers, or maybe they're thinking about, do I put my hand up to say that I might like to be part of the organisers network? And I know that we haven't given you the chance to ask the questions today, so please feel free to email me. There's my email address, and Sally's just posted it for me. I'd be really happy to hear from you. So we've got enough time. We've managed to keep to time, which is always an achievement with such interesting people and good things to talk about. So we've got time for a couple of minutes of reflection or from each of you. So if we go to Erica first.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to keep it very short because if there is a space for questions, that's always really great. I think the impact of inserting possibility into this system of fashion, which has been so hegemonic in a sense and so homogenized for so many individuals, including students, and the kind of singular narrative, so the possibility of thinking differently or navigating differently, I think is really important. And the validating of this kind of speculative, wild, unreasonable, audacious, radical, within fashion. I think fashion education and fashion thinking, and even the way we fashion ourselves in society, the way we behave, how we travel, how we move through public spaces, we've slowly become so averse to taking any kinds of risks that this invitation to think, even if and then slowly it could ripple outwards to acting differently, to accepting different enactments around us. So I think a really important seed to be planting. So thank you very much for it. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Erica. I love being unreasonable. Sanem, how about you?
Thank you. That was really a great experience for me. And I think it's, I will think about the dysfunctional systems are already there, and we know we have to, deal with the problems. But I think what is interesting and what is fascinating is that once you agree with yourself to become the functional one, you have multiple choices and you have multiple worlds in that sense, and then seeing such platform and being able to reach out anytime you want is just wonderful. It's already a fiction itself. So in that sense, thank you, Amy, and thank you for inviting us and open up a space to unpack all the issues we discussed together. This is a brilliant work, and I would like to see it in the future, how it will evolve.
Thank you, Sanem. I love the idea that the project is itself a fiction that is becoming true. You're right. I mean, yeah. Anything that happens in the world was once somebody's imagination, and then it happens. Yeah, it's a great reminder. And Janine.
Thank you, Amy. I agree. I mean, I have little to add except for, to what everyone just said. And I do think somewhere I read years ago that it's not that need doesn't precede, like the realization of things, but it's desire. We tend to think that we have the things that we have, or we have the lives that we have because we needed to have these things, but no, it's really desire that pushes, that's the force behind, and not need. Later, we think we needed it always, right? But I do think that, you know, one of the most valuable aspects of this project for me is, you know, that it's not a project into the future. It's not a science fiction, an exercise in science fiction. It is you know, it is the enactment and the, you know, through kinship, and this is a super important aspect of the project, that the present can, you know, our present can be different right now. And this is invaluable. And I commend you, Amy, for this effort. And I really am grateful for joining this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. That seems like a good, very positive note to end on. So I'd like to really thank each of you, Erica, Sanem and Janine, for sharing your thoughts so generously. It's been, I mean, such a treat to, I mean, when I was asked to set this up, I thought, who can I ask to have this conversation? Like, what a treat to be able to reach out in 3 different directions across the world and have this conversation. So thank you. And I would, and thanks to Sally for all of that admin pasting things behind the scenes. And I guess I'd like to finish by thanking all of the contributors to Fashion Fictions, because the project would literally be me having written five 100-word fictions by myself if it wasn't for everybody else bringing their creativity and their energy and enthusiasm and their willingness to go along with some you know, outlandish ideas and to join in thinking the outlandish ideas. So yeah, the project is nothing without people joining in and finding the right way for them to join in, and that's kind of the ethos of the invitation to everyone today. So thanks to everyone who's taken part so far, and welcome to anyone who would like to join in from now on. Yeah, it's been wonderful. I'm going to draw it to a close. I'll officially stop recording, which means that it's then the end. So thanks everyone so much for coming, and yeah, we've managed to finish on time. Hurrah. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sanem and Erica.
Thank you.